Hello, everyone. My name is Victor. I am the Occult Technician, and this is Mind War, Episode 12. In this series, we're working from the book titled Mind War, written by Dr. Michael Aguino. Mind War was written as a strategy for peace on a global scale. The goal of Mind War was to review the Army's psychological operations at the end of the Vietnam War and come up with a new updated strategy for the purpose of maintaining peace through psychological operations. As individuals, we are taking the tactics found in Mind War and we are applying them to our individual lives in order to overcome the difficulties we may be facing. The goal of Mind War is to achieve the Aristos, the best possible scenario for our current situation. Situations may be inevitable. We may be unable to change our current situation. So our goal is to create the best possible scenario. What is the best possible living scenario for the situation that we find ourselves in? It's through the achievement of the Aristos that we are going to find the ability to then possibly change our situation if that's something that we want to do. Throughout this series, one of the things that we focused on is gaining a better understanding of the thought processes of the people that we deal with, whether they are family members, co-workers, students, other community members, whoever it may be, right? We have to understand what makes them tick and meet them at their level before we can expect anyone to make a change. We also have to understand what makes ourselves tick. We have to take that true and honest look at our own lives. What is really going on? What are the real troubles that we're facing? What are the difficulties that we place upon ourselves? It's only through that honest evaluation of our battlefield that we can make any forward progress to achieve the Aristos. We've made it pretty far through the book, folks. We are currently on page 207. We are working through section 3, which is Mind War Campaign. We are now talking about what it means to actually conduct the Mind War Campaign after we've done our intelligence gathering and planning. What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve with our Mind War operations, right? So we are on chapter 9, phase 3. Hour by hour, resolve firmly, like a Roman and a man, to do what comes to hand with correct and natural dignity, and with humanity, independence, and justice. Allow your mind freedom from all other considerations. This you can do if you will approach each action as though it were your last, dismissing the wayward thought, the emotional recoil from the commands of reason, the desire to create an impression in admiration of self, the discontent with your lot. See how little a man needs to master for his days to flow on in quietness and piety. He has but to observe these few counsels, and the gods will ask nothing more. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, Book 2-5. Section A, Recalling the Physical War, Mind War Contrast. Mind War Phase 3. Attack is where the entire complex of Mind War comes together. everything done previously leads to and integrates at this point, and everything subsequent to it is dependent upon its successful design, coordination, and execution. A summary of the characteristics of physical war versus mind war emphasizes the value of the later. Number 1, physical war. Results from the stumbling into a foreign conflict situation by the United States rather than a discretionary involvement. Is first preceded by civilian diplomacy, which has no clear goal in sight nor strategy to achieve that goal. Is next preceded by non-Department of Defense paramilitary operations and or economic and or cybernetic damage, none of which has a clear goal in sight or strategy to achieve it. Is thus the escalation result of the failure of these two precedent actions. Indeed, their probable aggravation of the situation consists of the application of lethal and destructive combat force against any appearance of resistance without concern for the justice of that resistance. Physical war has no clear goal in sight nor strategy to achieve it. Continued force is simply applied until all resistance ceases or until disconnected civilian interactions negotiate a suspension. Physical war utilizes the three old Special Operations Forces, MISO, Special Forces, and Civil Affairs, as battlefield janitors to improve the destructive efficiency of the combat forces and deal with the human and property devastation left in their wake. Physical war takes an increasingly larger toll on human injury and death, flight for survival, and enduring hatred resulting from these. Physical war diverts massive and increasing amounts of U.S. financial and material assets from domestic needs, and it prolongs and aggravates rather than solves the original problem. Folks, it is November 2023, and we, as a country, the United States, find itself mired in two new wars that seem to have cropped up over this last year. This is after decades of war in the Middle East, and a lot of American citizens are asking these exact questions. Why are we doing this? We could be focusing on rebuilding the country, moving towards a better future for the United States, but once again, we find ourselves looking outside of our borders while internally things dissolve and disintegrate. Number 2, mind war. Mind war commences as a deliberate, discretionary decision by the United States in concert with all of the participants in the existing problem situation to declare mind war against that problem, not one another. Mind war is preceded by civilian diplomacy aware of a foundation diagnosis developed by the mind war branch, working in concert with the metaphors branch towards a stabilizing aristos, and planning in concert with the parapolitics branch for an enduring moral polis elimination of the underlying causes of the problem situation. Mind war, in the event of diplomatic failure, commences a military exclusive mind war campaign utilizing the three Special Operations Forces, Mind War Branch, Metaphors Branch, and the Parapolitics Branch as the initial exclusive projections of U.S. power. All physical war forces are kept unengaged for possible recourse only in the event of mind war failure. Mind war branch function is to develop the foundation diagnosis and to precondition all participants in the conflict to a mental attitude of calm, reasonable, and constructive cooperation throughout the presence of both mind, metaphors branch, and parapolitics branch in the situation area. Metaphors branch's function is to deploy to the situation area, identify and secure the cooperation of all key individuals and parties to the conflict, and establish the aristos with a sufficient stability for handoff to parapolitics branch. Parapolitics branch function is to commence planning for the configuration and implementation of an enduring moral polis, solution to the underlying destabilizing conditions upon their identification by the foundation diagnosis. Then to deploy to the situation area and implement the polis solution upon aristos stabilization of the area by metaphors branch. Mind war kills or injures no one and destroys nothing. Mind war expends only the normal operating funds for the mind war branch, metaphors branch, and parapolitics branch units involved and deployed. Mind war solves not only the immediate problem, but through creation of the polis, potential future problems as well. Mind war is declared, again, by all participants to formally end once the polis is established and parapolitics branch withdrawals. B. The Mind War Command Location. The Mind War campaign is controlled from an encapsulated facility, either contracted or, if necessary, constructed for this purpose. If the problem situation is confined to a single nation state, the Mind War Command should be located within it unless the existing destabilization is so great as to pose danger to it. In that case, the Mind War Command should be located in a nearby country perceived by all participants as neutral. The encapsulation is from an environmental, not a privileged access standpoint. The contracted or constructed facility should permit Mind War branch to implement and continue a completely controlled psychon atmosphere, such that anyone within it is subjected to every possible calming, cooperative, optimistic, and creative stimulus, and shielded from all possible negative, disruptive, exhaustive, and stress-inducing ones. The entire complex is, for instance, bathed in alpha brain wave resonance in complementary magnetic fields. Its air conditioning is negatively ionized. The color red appears nowhere while the color blue predominates. Sharp angular lines and objects are eliminated or minimized, and all interior spaces and furnishings are arranged to remain beyond the CD but within PSD proximities, as calculated from the cultures of the situation participants. This psychon preconditioning is neither cosmetic nor trivial. It is a precisely constructed conditioning of the mental processes of all within the Mind War campaign to enhance their chances for cooperative success in the campaign. Additionally, while none of these Mind War branch controls is clandestine, they should all be as inconspicuous as possible so that awareness of their curiosity concerning them does not divert participants' attention from the campaign at hand. So again, we've talked in past episodes about the importance of creating a calming environment in your personal life. Now, we may not have as much authority over where we live or where we work that we like, and we may not be able to make as many changes as we would like in order to create that calming environment. but it is our duty to do our very best, whether it's within the home or the school or work, trying our very best to create a calming atmosphere. And we do this because, again, we're looking for the differences between the physical war and the mind war, right? If we can create a calming environment to work from, we can do everything we can to avoid the physical war pitfalls. And we can achieve the aristos. We can solve our problems through the mind war. And again, mind war isn't a bad word, right? It isn't a phrase that should have negative connotations attached to it. We're doing mind war in order to avoid physical war. Physical war is what we want to get out of, not only on the global scale, but also in our personal lives. We're doing everything we can to avoid it. Physical war in our personal lives may not mean actually being physically attacked, but it may mean other type of attacks that come against us, right? Punishments, whether it's from family or friends, punishments from the boss, at your work environment, right? Just any way that the people in our lives can make things more difficult or uncomfortable, right? These can be signs of kind of a physical war environment. So our goal, again, through mind war, is to create an environment that decreases the possibility of physical war tactics being used against us. The mind war command participation. In phase 0, the Metaforce branch begins the process of identifying all participant individuals and groups to the conflict. This identification is redefined during phases 1 and 2 to single out the most essential political leaders, paramilitary commanders, and other key participants, such as religious figures and economic executives. By the end of phase 2, this is narrowed down to the smallest number of necessary and essentials to consensus concerning the establishment of the aristos. These individuals are then invited to the Mind War Command, where together with the United States they will assume control of the campaign. So again, those people in our lives that we would identify as participants to the conflict, right? So that may be specific family members who are causing difficulty for you based on the hierarchy of the home. If someone who is a parent, let's say, is very religious or very political, and those ideologies are damaging to the family, damaging to you, damaging to the friendships of the family, right? We have to point those things out and understand what we're dealing with. The other participants that may be causing issues in our lives, again, are maybe our boss. It may actually be their boss that causes the problem. We might find that our direct supervisor can be thought of as more of a team member, right? Somebody who also wants to join us in this mind war in order to prevent the issues that are arising from someone who is higher up in that hierarchy, in that chain of command, right? But not all participants are those who portray themselves or are considered leaders, right? We may have to look to subordinates to find solutions. It's often not the boss themselves who has all the answers and knows how to do all the work. They may actually just be kind of figureheads that are motivating the team to do their job. But if one or two team members decides to leave the team, then the job no longer functions. right? But if those team members stay on, but the boss leaves, hey, everything continues to run just how it was, right? So again, who are those participants in our lives? Who are those participants that are either causing issues or may work with us towards solutions? Within the mind war, within the mind war command, the United States presence, consisting initially of the Metaphors branch and then of Parapolitics branch, remains at all times advisory on the principle that disputing parties must ultimately resolve and reconcile their own distances and disagreements. Nevertheless, this U.S. advisory function is completely and continually active, not passive. Initially, the mind war combative skills of Metaphors branch may be called into play to dispel initial suspicions and tensions which resist the mind war branch environmental conditioning. These flow into Metaphors branch negotiation function. As a fully cooperative participant, climate emerges. Metaphors branch fades imperceptibly away from the mind war command to be replaced by the parapolitics branch. The agenda shifts from the immediate aristos stabilization to the permanent moral polis construction. Again, that polis is looking forward. Where do we go from here? The polis is the hope of tomorrow and the purpose that we have in working hard today. D. Mind War Campaign Integrity. Success of the Mind War campaign, and thus of the entire success of the Mind War command, and thus the entire Mind War campaign, requires that its action be open, transparent, and at all times publicly explainable. While U.S. and foreign intelligence agencies may, and doubtless will, pay careful attention to what the Mind War Command discusses, decides, and implements, such agencies are not themselves Mind War Command participants. They are, however, all welcome and encouraged to make their information concerning the problem situation available to all of the participants. Author there is basically saying when a Mind War Command is built and the different sections of the Mind War team are put together, they will gladly accept information from all sources. Section E, the on-site environment. While the Mind War Command participants are working towards the Aristos and Polis realizations, the Mind War branch extends the PsyCon atmosphere within the Mind War Command facility to the entire situation area as fully as technology and opportunity permit. This may include use of all EMS media impacting the area to transmit alpha brainwave resonance, or in extreme instances of violence, delta brainwave resonance. Again, the brainwave resonance that we're talking about, again, the alpha is a calm state, and delta is where you're actually thinking and focusing on, say, math problems, where you're using that 5% of your conscious mind. Negative atmospheric ionization may be enhanced by various weather control measures, such as cloud seeding. Locales identified as especially susceptible to outbreaks of violence may be measured for disruptive EMFs, and any such detected violence neutralized by either eliminating the source, as in nearby power lines or unshielded electromagnetic generators, or counterbalanced by directed EMFs. Again, with those electromagnetic fields, I gave some examples before, like my refrigerator, when it's running, the motor that runs it vibrates very loud. It vibrates through the house. It's very distracting, and it doesn't create kind of a calming atmosphere, right? Or next to my bed, I had a surge protector where I would plug in my phone charger and my watch charger and my night light. And what I realized is if I left that on and it was very quiet in the house, I could actually hear the electricity running through the surge protector. So now, at the end of the night, when I'm ready to go to sleep and things are charged up, instead of turning the light off and just leaving my phone plugged in, charging all night, even though it might be fully charged, I turn the actual surge protector itself off. And that stops that electromagnetic frequencies from running right next to my head all night long. Obviously, psychons extend only so far into a situation of human unrest, where physical privations of nourishment, safety, health, and cultural lifestyle exist. Metaforce branch teams work with all available local, national, non-governmental organization and United States assets to cooperate towards the Aristos stabilization. Mind War Command On-Site Communication, Section F. Mind War Command participants must at all times know what is happening in the situation area, not only so that they may refine their efforts accordingly, but also because as key leaders and determinants of the social forces in motion, they will be reluctant to distance themselves from these forces unless assured that their control and influence are not being severed. Similarly, the situation local entities and groups must retain a sense of involvement with their leaders so that their mind war command absence does not result in factionalism or spontaneous disruptions. The mind war command transition to on-site. The purpose of setting up the Mind War Command is to enable swift, efficient actions towards the foundation diagnosis established Aristos by all essential participants in an environment psychon engineered for maximum cooperation. While the Mind War Command facility is also used for initial discussion and planning of the subsequent moral polis under the guidance of Parapolitics Branch, the implementation of this polis must necessarily occur on site. Thus, as soon as there is basic consensus concerning the nature and structure of the polis, which may be markedly different from the existing haphazard political and social mechanisms, participants return to their original locales to continue the implementation. They are accompanied by appropriately specialized parapolitics branch teams. At this stage, Metaforce branch, their task is done, and it vanishes as magically as Miss Poppins. While Mind War branch continues its conditioning of the entire subject area until the polis is securely established and all parapolitics branch teams return home. When all participants have departed the Mind War command, it remains open only as a point of coordination between the on-site parapolitics teams and the situation location Mind War branch environmental conditioning. As soon as these cease, the Mind War command is closed, and the Mind War campaign comes to an end in Phase 4. So again, in our personal lives, we are playing all the roles of the participants in the mind war, right? You may have co-workers or family members who are working with you, but the majority of this work is going to be done on your own in order to solve these issues in your own personal lives. The mind war command, you may simply think of it as your bedroom. If you have your own room and you're able to establish that calming area where you can think and focus about what you need to do, you can think about as you move in and out of your room and interact with the people in your family. And each time you leave your room, you go out with a different purpose, right? Maybe you leave your room because you hear commotion out in your home. When you do that and you go throughout the rest of your house to figure out what is going on, you're not going to be doing that in the function of a parapolitics branch out there trying to propagandize all the changes that you want to implement. Instead, you're going out more in an intelligence gathering situation, right? Or role. You're going out there to gather what is happening in my home right now and what needs to be done to quickly stabilize it to a predefined foundation diagnosis, Aristos, right? The next time you leave your room, when things are calm and there seems to be peace and people start to recognize those changes that you're making in your own life that we've talked about before, right? Then you leave your room more in the role of the parapolitics branch team member, where you're now starting to communicate more about future changes, continued progressive changes that you're making towards a better Aristos, or that best possible scenario for the current situation, right? And again, your Mind War command, that Mind War command center may simply be your room, right? If it's at work, it might just be your cubicle, right? So these things can seem overwhelming when you first get started, but again, as you break them down into their individual pieces, you'll become more comfortable with actually implementing these changes, right? And implementing the different missions that you need to do to get a better understanding of what you're truly dealing with in your life. All right, so let's move on to Chapter 10, Phase 4. In response to Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of the women. Arnold Schwarzenegger after Genghis Khan. If only victories which leave no regret are those which are gained over ignorance. Napoleon Bonaparte. Section A. Mind War Victory. Victory in a mind war campaign is declared when it has successfully resolved its problem situation without having to give way to the physical war forces, which stand ever close at hand on all sides of the conflict, ready to honor the great Khan. Where the United States mind war forces are concerned, their victory is also invisible. All three of them appear, function, then disappear between the raindrops, particularly Mind War Branch, whose mental manipulations are significantly subconscious. Again, folks, a lot of this work that we're doing in our own lives has to be done clandestinely. You don't want to right away, announce all these big changes that you want to make in your life. You don't want to point out to all those people in your life all the things that you don't like about them that are causing, things that they do that are causing trouble in your life. All that's going to do is get things riled up. A lot of this we have to do behind the scenes, quietly, covertly. And as we make changes and we start to see successes, so will those around us. They'll start to see the positive changes in our lives, and they may begin to inquire. And when they do, that's when the parapolitics branch role that you're playing can take effect and begin to really propagandize them with the good things that you've been working on. What Mind War participants see is ostensibly a U.S.-hosted conference in which a constructive compromise, previously elusive, somehow materializes to everyone's adequate, if not complete, satisfaction. At the conference's conclusion, the parties returned home in a coincidentally less violent situation than the one they left a short time earlier, inspired by a number of new options for revitalizing their precarious social structures. B. Time and space. Number 1. Time. As per Chapter 8b, Mind War solutions are current disputes. Mind War solutions to current disputes must be oriented to the cyclical or linear time frames of those affected. If their perception is linear, the solution will be seen as merely temporary. If cyclical, the application indefinitely. In one conspicuous example, Israel visualizes a divinely commanded linear mandate to its Holy Land and will be unsatisfied until the entirety is reclaimed. Palestinians, regarding their inhabited lands as timelessly theirs, neither understand nor accept Israel's inexorable schedule. Because of this time disengagement, attempts to arrange compromises between them are impossible. Only when all parties of an aristos understand and accept it in the same time context will it not self-destruct. Now, I had no intention whatsoever at mentioning the current Israeli-Palestinian war that is occurring. Again, it's November of 2023. What the author here is saying that the Israeli side is looking at their religious mandate for a linear future, a future that only can come when A, B, C through Z occur. Everything has to occur in linear fashion until they've achieved some type of heaven on earth or whatever it is they're looking for, right? Where the Palestinian side of the conflict is simply looking to live a cyclical life in their homeland, right? They just want to go about their life and continue on into the future. It's the conflict that is arising is between the different viewpoints of their time frames. It's very interesting that this book brings this up. This was written years ago, but it foresaw the events that we're dealing with today. And this is one way to kind of understand why these two sides are having so much difficulty coming up with an aristos. Even when immediate participants are synchronous, external or non-nation state influences may not be. In the Mideast, for instance, Western linear governments have found themselves confronted by Islamic movements which are unmoved by the asserted time-legitimized sovereignty of present regimes. What matters to them is the timeless priority of their religious faith. A mind war solution to such situations will have to stand the test of religious as well as secular expectations. And again, as we look throughout history, we see that the primary Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have all remained somewhat consistent, but the nation states that house those religions have been in constant flux for millennia. The people who believe in the religions don't necessarily care so much about the nation state in which they live. They don't have the same level of patriotism for their nation state as they do have faith in their religion, right? Their religion supersedes the nation state. We can implement that same thought process again to those in our lives. We have to look and say, what is more important to this person who is causing trouble in our life? Is their political faith, is their religious faith more important than the overall cohesiveness of the family unit? Right? Is the idea of short-term financial gain more important to your corporation than the long-term sustainability of that corporation? Right? You have to really look at the motivations of the people you're dealing with in your mind war battlefield. Absent coinciding time arrangements, an apparently successful mind war campaign cannot expect a final textbook victory. Instead, a decision will have to be made to either prolong the campaign indefinitely, which, due to the energy required of all three mind war branches, would be prohibitive, or acknowledging failure and standing aside for physical war. Realistically, the only way to avoid this would be for the asynchronous participants to accept a harmonious, if not exactly identical, time framework. Historical precedents for this are not encouraging, though Western European Christianity, after centuries of violent discord, managed something like it in the face of widespread Enlightenment disaffection with Catholicism and the various Protestantism alike. Linear Marxism, on the other hand, failed to adapt to the greater pressure of the cyclical supranational capitalism and finally disintegrated under it. In European history, we see constant battles between religious factions of Christianity. And over time, the Christian factions lost their power, lost their control to the nation state. And that's what we currently are dealing with for the time being, although that is quickly changing. The nation state has become more powerful than the Christian faction, right? And that ultimately has brought peace to the European continent. So instead of one flavor of Christianity attacking the other flavor of Christianity, we now see that the nation states have acquired the weapons of war. They've taken the reins of the weapons of war away from the church, and they're now controlled by the state. And this is what we see today of more of nation states fighting each other over resources required by corporations. Number 2, space. As also per chapter 8b, the nation-state model of sovereignty persists in some parts of the globe while abruptly and gradually disintegrating in others. Signed agreements and idealistic polis models mean little if the human sand beneath them flows away in unrelated directions into unanticipated new configurations. These variables are many: tribal, religious, linguistic, racial, economic, sexual, ideological, supposedly extinct national identity, and possibly multinational corporate. Nor is only one of these unconventional forces at work within various conflict situations, particularly in the more volatile areas of the world. Within a mind war campaign, Phase 3 must identify and include as participant representatives or leaders from any such influential irregularities together with the accustomed nation state officials. This won't make arriving at the foundation diagnosis or its implied aristos any easier, but it will make them realistic in implementation. One of the things that we often deal with the people in our lives is fractured and competing thought thought frames, right? We may have a person in our life who is very religious, while at the same time a fan of professional sports. So they go to church every Sunday and they preach all types of religious doctrine. But then on Sunday, they have no problems, later at that Sunday or throughout the week, they have no problems participating in the customs that go along with professional sports. Uh, Drinking alcohol, watching, either promiscuous or even violent commercials that occur during the sports. So as an outside observer, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to look at them and say, well, which side am I going to agree with? Which side do I believe that you truly are? Are you this pious religious individual who tries to hold themselves up to some type of moral standard? Or are you just another of the masses who enjoys the sensationalism of the professional sports in all of its accoutrements? Right? So again, we have to find ourselves standing on solid ground because those around us are standing on quicksand that's constantly shifting and changing as they try to meet the most recent demands of their minds or their body. Right? It can be very difficult for us, kind of as outsiders looking in, right, to understand how these people function. They function with a fractured mind. They can call one thing good and the other evil, and then the very next day do the opposite. It's very difficult to deal with, but that's what we have to do. And over time, we're going to start to break apart some of those things. And through the breaking apart of these different thought frames, different belief systems, we will start to create a more solid foundation for a new way of thinking, a new way of believing, a new purpose for mankind. Section C, bigger ponds, bigger fish. By design, a mind war campaign addresses the most compact situation which lends itself to reasonable isolation. The larger the scope, the more numerous and complex the variables until the totality becomes unmanageable as well as unsolvable. The problem of such intentional limitation, of course, is that those larger ponds, the larger fish swimming in them, are still out there. At any point, whether incidentally or intentionally, one or more of them may impact and possibly overwhelm the more compact mind war campaign scenario. Predictably, a balance must be struck. The campaign is continued at its manageable level, but a cautious eye stays alert for external surprises. Some of these, such as international financial cycles, can be taken into account as necessary without much extra effort. Others, such as major physical war outbreaks, serious disease pandemics, coups, assassinations, nuclear accidents, major weather disasters, or wildcards which cannot be anticipated. Any can temporarily or permanently disable or otherwise on track mind war campaign, just as possibly the factors prescient to that campaign may be unaffected by a calamity which captures widespread public and media attention. So this is very important to focus on, very important to think about. So again, if you are setting up your mind war campaign and your mind war strategies, and let's say you have um, 3 different battlefields that you're kind of working on, 3 different situation areas. You have your home, you have your work environment, and let's say you have children and you have the school where your children go, right? You may be able to establish peace and find and accomplish an aristos in your home. You work with your family members, everyone's on the same page, and you start to bring about peace and solutions, right? But outside of the home, something affects your workplace, your career, which in turn affect your finances, make you more stressed out, more tired. And now those issues start to pour over into your home environment. Same thing with your children. Your children may begin having difficulties at school with classmates or teachers. They might get sick because of the constant sickness and, it seems to fluctuate through the school. And they start to bring those things home. So now you have these 2 outside situation areas affecting that battlefield of your home, right? We have to constantly be on the lookout for those other situational areas that may be spilling into our peace, right? The peace that we make within our homes, within ourselves, right? With those that we love. We have to, once we attain that peace, once we attain that aristos, you do have to defend it, okay? D, conclusion. In the shadow of old Nick. Think of it. On the surface, there is hunger and fear. Men still exercise unjust laws. They fight, tear one another to pieces. A mere few feet beneath the waves, their reign ceases. Their evil drowns. Here on the ocean floor is the only independence. Here I am free. Imagine what would happen if they controlled machines such as this submarine boat. Far better that they think there's a monster and hunt me with harpoons. Captain Nemo, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The period circa 1350 to the 1600s, termed the Renaissance, was characterized by a continuing increase in secular education, with emphasis shifting from the clerical universities to secular courts and academics. The medieval era emphasis on logic and metaphysics gave way to revised classical learning in areas such as language, literature, history, and ethics. The Renaissance began in Italy due to its strong ties to classical knowledge and due to the comparative wealth of the major Italian cities. From 1450 to 1600, a Neoplatonic movement backed by one of the Florentine Medicis gained considerable influence. Plato's works were translated into Latin by 1469. It was such a climate in Florence that spawned Niccolo Machiavelli, 1469 to 1527, whose pragmatic ideas were to so infuriate the pseudo-pious and hypocritical officials of his time that Old Nick would eventually become a pseudonym for the devil himself. In actuality, Machiavelli never advocated evil or depravity. He was a champion of the good and virtuous. His evil reputation came about simply because he pricked the balloons of so many of the predatory and pretentious. In some ways, I like to, in my art and in my videos, especially in the occult sermons that I do, I like to play the role of Old Nick, play the role of Machiavelli. The goal through a lot of my occult sermons is to take current mindsets, current belief systems that are dangerous, destructive, evil, and push them beyond the boundaries. Tell those people who believe in those systems that they're not doing enough and that they need to push it further. And my hope in doing that is that it will, in a way, short circuit their mind and say, wait a minute. This is what comes next if we continue down our current path with this belief system that we're pushing, right? Push people to the extremes now in their mind before those extremes become a reality. We push people to imagine what comes next if we carry on with our current path, right? We push them further. And we say, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you take it to the next step? And then the next step after that, because you're not extreme enough in your thoughts, in your way of living, in the things that you support. And often what happens is when you push people like that, they crumble. It's so easy to find those belief systems that people seem so pious and so strong to advocate for today. Things that literally have no meaning in their life. But they will stand up and wave the flag and protest, right? Even though what they're protesting for, even though what they're supporting is evil and dangerous and disgusting, and it's doing nothing but damaging those around them and themselves. Again, through my art and through my videos and through my work, some of what I say may sound extreme. But again, it is simply a tool. It is simply a thought process, right? We are pushing people to the extremes of their current belief systems in order to have them reevaluate those thought systems and beliefs. And maybe through that process, we can start to develop more common sense solutions. Machiavelli's political philosophy may be summed up thus: any means, however lawless or unscrupulous, may be justifiably employed by a ruler in order to establish and maintain a strong central government. The founders of a society must be excused for acts which are inexcusable after the society has been established. The grounds for this initial license are simply the forceful initial establishment of good qualities and benefits of the resultant society. Examples of such unprincipled founders in The Prince are Moses, Romulus, and Sirius, each of whom attacked and destroyed rivals in order to found the important state in question. This license was not venial, however. What Machiavelli saw about him was a chaotic world of callous indifference to human privation and suffering, which he characterized as fortuna. In his famous commentary, The Prince, he held that it was incumbent upon wise rulers to recognize both appropriate solutions to fortuna and the most effective timing for their implementation. Properly done, this would result in a general state of well-being, which is the practical aim of politics, guided by the ancient Roman tradition of civic virtue. The key to the achievement of these ends is virtue, the ability to, or virtu, the ability to think intelligently and act resolutely. Machiavelli never proposed that ends justify means. The correct quote from The Prince reads, "Moreover, in the actions of all men, and most of all of princes, where there is no tribunal to which we can appeal, we look to results. Wherefore, if a prince succeeds in establishing and maintaining his authority, the means will always be judged honorable and be approved by everyone. For the vulgar are always taken by appearances and by results, and the world is made up of the vulgar, the few only finding room when the many have no longer ground to stand on." Machiavelli saw all political history as an interplay between fortuna and virtue. When virtue is held by the many, republics are possible. When virtue is held by the few, tyrannies result. Again, virtue is described as civic virtue. Civic virtue would be when you are interacting with your community. Are you doing it in a virtuous way? Are you doing it in an upstanding, solid way that is peaceful and just? To understand the governing principles of political life, one must examine the beginnings of significant political systems. It is the beginning that sets the pattern for a political situation. Successive rulers are relative imitations reflecting that beginning. This is the basis for Machiavelli's being called the first political scientist, since he sought an explanation of a state in which it is and has been, rather than in the future goals or ideals. It is for this reason that the construction of the moral polis, as discussed in Chapter 5, is critical to the successful outcome of a mind war campaign. A veneer of virtue cannot compensate for, nor long survive in a community lacking civitas. Machiavelli may be considered the first political philosopher to base his philosophy solely upon natural as opposed to divinely inspired mankind. The divine law component of Aquinas' four-part legal universe was irrelevant to his perceptions and prescriptions. In his Summa Theologica, St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, described the ordering of the universe by four types of law: eternal, the mind of, hence, intelligible only to God; natural, which is eternal law to the extent that human reason can detect consistencies in it, for example, science; divine, as revealed through Christ and the Christian Church; and human, which mankind makes in imitation of and towards the good perceived in or revealed by natural and divine law. Machiavelli contended that since divine law is beyond the comprehension of human reason, it cannot and should not be asserted as justification for social systems. Politics, he argued, belong wholly in the realm of reason and should be evaluated on that basis alone. For the manner in which men live is so different from the way in which they ought to live that he who leaves the common course for that which he ought to follow will find that it leads him to ruin rather than to safety. This focus on achievable practicality, the aristos, ultimately encourages man to attain dignity by taking complete responsibility for himself. One of the things that we deal with in our current political environment is politicians who constantly are reaching back to that eternal or divine law, right? They're saying that they somehow have some deeper understanding of what God or the universe wants. And they decide to try to enact that in their political philosophy, which we see failing over and over. We need to again look closer to that natural or human law. What are we really doing? What is really happening in our life versus this idealistic utopian vision of some morality that doesn't exist? The morality that we're taught in the Judeo-Christian West does not exist. It is a lie. None of those people who call themselves leaders, who preach that morality, maintain it themselves. They are often the least moral among us. In thus relegating religion to something metaphorical and optional rather than literal and mandatory in human affairs, Machiavelli followed the lead of William of Ockham, 1288 to 1348, of later Occam's razor fame, who stressed belief in God as a function of pure faith rather than reason, and anticipated the demise of the Enlightenment several centuries later, or the deism of the Enlightenment, Thus, Machiavelli, like Plato and Aristotle, sought the aristos. Unlike them, he limited it to reason and to mankind in its natural state, and he excused all incidental excesses in a state only if an ultimate common good could thereby be more quickly and thoroughly attained. With this book, what this book proposes is to evolve the rationality of Machiavelli to the present century, to argue that virtue exists in the soul and will of humanity. As Camus warned, it is not crushed before it can respond to Fortuna, recapture the civitas of the original moral polis, and establish or deny. Unlike Machiavelli, we possess the means to undertake the true quest for the Grail without resort to the sword. Mind war is not just some new uses for old tools in the U.S. Army's venerable inventory. It is an entirely new way of comprehending and grappling with the concept and reality of war in general. If the reach is ambitious, so are the stakes, which is reviewed in Chapter 1, are human and material costs near or at unendurable extremes. Left to drift into the increasingly more dangerous currents of physical war, not just the United States but the planetary population generally faces a dim and discouraging future. Indeed, far more lethal and terminal than anything George Orwell conjectured when the worst thing he could imagine were three authoritarian but stable superstates. Mind war is the secret of Captain Nemo's Nautilus. No longer a monster to be feared, but the crucible of Calogathia. All right, folks. We may be coming to the end of Mind War. It looks like all that's left here is an afterword and an explanation of some of the acronyms, right? We have a bibliography and here, the index. Again, this book is titled Mind War. It was written by Dr. Michael Aguino. It is one of a 3-book series. I hope to eventually, in future seasons of the Mind War series, work through those other books. But I think Mind War is a great first step. Okay? This is a great way to gather information about the issues of your life. Take that true and honest look at what you're facing, not only from external sources that are coming against you, but from the different troubles and issues that you put upon yourself. Taking that truthful and honest look at yourself in order to create a plan, set some goals, have a mission statement for your future. Again, the goal of Mind War was to create the Aristos, the best possible scenario for our current situation. So, I guess this is going to conclude season 1 of the series titled Mind War. Again, we worked from the book titled Mind War by Dr. Michael Aguino. I have several other books that I'm excited to work from that are outside of this book. And I hope to start on those seasons soon. As always, please take a look at my Etsy page. You're going to find all kinds of great hoodies, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts, t-shirts, hats, and stickers that have the symbols that you see in front of me, the symbols that we use to subliminally and liminally keep us on track, keep us focused. We use these symbols to promote the work that we do, not only to those outside of us, but we promote it to ourselves. Seeing this symbol in front of me as I go throughout my day reminds me of why I do this hard work. And for all of you, you can create your own symbols, your own logos, right? You can use those to also stay motivated in your own life as you work through your mind war, as you evaluate your own battlefield in your life. As always, folks, if you have any questions, if you have any issues that you would like to have someone else just to hear them, just let me know. Reach out to me. I'll be glad to work with you. I'll be glad to talk with you and hopefully motivate you to continue on working towards achieving your Aristos. As always, folks, remember, harden your hearts and open your minds, because this is Mind War. Thank you for being here. Your friend Victor, the Occult Technician.